Hi guys, this is the story of Rhoan. She was built in 1865 in London, in England. She was 310 feet long, she was 40 foot wide, and she weighed 2,738 tonnes. She had 245 first class cabins, 30 second class accommodation and 30 third class accommodation. She was an RMS, which meant she was a Royal Mail steamer. Her main purpose was to carry mail, but she also carried cargo and passengers. Her maiden voyage was down to South America, but then the company that owned her put on the lucrative run to the Caribbean. She would basically sail down to Charlotte Amalie. She would offload her passengers, pick up passengers, go back to England, and that would be it. The round trip would take around about 3 months. In 1866 there was an outbreak of yellow fever in St Thomas, so basically nobody wanted to go there. What they started to do was use Great Harbour in Peter Island. Now the Rhone, October the 29th 1867, the Rhone and another ship from the Royal Mail Steam and Packet Company called the Conway were at anchor in Peter Island when a big storm came along. Now the two captains didn't actually think that it would be a hurricane. They believed it was a northerly storm coming in because it was so late in the year, when in fact it was the biggest hurricane to hit the islands. Now they decided that they was going to stay where they were at Peter Island, and while they was there, at the height of the beginning of the storm, there was said to have been 10 to 15 foot waves going across the channel, winds of around about 150 mile an hour. Now, both ships done quite well in the opening part of the storm, except that both of them dragged their anchor a little. All of a sudden, the storm died down and there was a major calm. The fact of the matter is that the two guys were in the eye of the storm, the two ships. They decided then that they would try and run for Road Harbour, which was directly opposite. The Conway upped anchor. She was much smaller than the Rhone. She upped anchor. She got about 2/3 of the way across before she had any damage done to her. The Rhone, however, had a bit of a problem. They was having major troubles getting the main anchor up, which weighed 3,000 pounds, which is still actually in Peter Island, actually in Great Harbour. The captain actually decided to leave the anchor and head into the storm and try and sail out the storm in open ocean. He left Peter Island and headed up channel, thinking that he was still heading into a northerly. Well, actually, the next thing that happened is that they realised that they had made a bit of a mistake, because they realised the weather was closing in from behind them, and they actually realised that they were then in a hurricane. They tried to turn the ship around as fast as they could as the storm was closing in from behind them. They got pretty much most of the way around when speculation had it that Captain Woolley was the first person to lose his life in the sinking of the Rhone. He apparently got washed over the side of the ship as they was going through this turning manoeuvre. Just after that, the first mate, who hadn't actually done a lot of sailing in the Caribbean, took over the wheel after they lost the captain. And the one thing he remembered is that Captain Woolley had told him that he must avoid Blonde Rock under all circumstances. Blonde Rock comes up to about 15 feet from the surface. So the first mate favoured Salt Island as a passage to go out. Now he went out hanging close to Salt Island, but by this time they was in the height of the storm. The opening back part of a hurricane is pretty much the strongest part of the storm. He's motoring in a boat that's got a 600 horsepower engine that does 12 knots flat out, into a storm of winds of in excess of 160 mile an hour, seas of around about 20 feet now. And what was happening is he was moving forward slightly, but also moving towards his port side and towards Salt Island. The next thing that happened is that they heard one of the crew say that he had spotted land on the port bow. This was a rock later to be known as Black Rock, commonly known to most people around here as the can opener. The Rhone nestled against the side of Black Rock. The next big wave picked her up and punched a big hole in her midships. Cold water poured in to an engine that was running flat out and that would have been white hot. there was a massive explosion that broke the back of the ship. The sea stake basically done the rest. It ripped the bow clean off of the stern, like a piece of paper really. The stern section, which had the engines and most of the weight in it, actually sank pretty much where it was. The major loss of life was, depending on which books you read and which stories you hear, anything between 6 and 27 people survived the Rhone. The one thing that we do know is only one passenger survived the Rhone, an Italian gentleman. Of the crew that survived the Rhone, most of them basically grabbed hold of anything they possibly could, wood, anything that would float, and set sail towards Tortola. One crew member, a boiler stoker or a fireman, as he was known at the time, he realised that the ship was sinking. He got up onto the aft deck and climbed the aft mast, and apparently he was found safe about 27 hours after the storm had passed. Now, the major reason for a loss of life, of such a loss of life, was in those days, in the 1800s, swimming was a necessity, not a recreation as it is today. Now, if you was crew on a ship and you could swim, you was basically known as a Jonah to other people on the boat. They didn't want to work with you because the only reason you learned to swim was because you thought that ship was going to sink. Other people didn't think it was going to sink, so they didn't learn to swim. So if it did sink, they were going to die, and you was going to swim away from it. So they didn't want to work with you. Also, people that owned ships didn't like people that could swim because they didn't work as hard as the people that couldn't swim when the ship was sinking. Now, the main thing that happened to most people, crew would basically take passengers down below. First class passengers would be locked in their cabin. Second class passengers, 8 to 10 to a room, they would basically be tied to their beds for their own safety. Third class passengers didn't have a room, so what they would be is tied to cargo netting, any of the cargo, basically anything that wasn't being used at the time, what the crew didn't need. Now, this was okay if the ship got through the storm and everyone was okay. What would happen is someone would come down below and basically free you. But if a ship was sinking and you couldn't swim, would you go down to save them? Consequently, the crew didn't go down either. The one Italian gentleman who did survive, apparently he got washed out of his cabin and got washed onto Salt Island. A very lucky man. A lot of the cargo that was on the ship at the time got washed onto Salt Island as well. Now, what happened is the island was inhabited by Arawat Indians who believed in the Moko Jumbies. Now, the Moko Jumbies are the spirits of dead people that will come and haunt you if you steal anything from them. Now, these people didn't want anything to do with any of this stuff. So apparently they boxed it all up and they sent it back to the only person that they realised it belonged to, which was the Queen of England. Now, in 1867, basically the Queen looked at this stuff. She was like, I'm very, very impressed that these people, these savages from somewhere around the world, I don't know where it is, but I've got a damn good idea that I own it, have sent me all of this stuff. So she froze the rent on this island to £1 of salt per islander per year, as long as there's a monarch on the throne of England. This rent was paid up until 3 years ago, which would have been 2004, when the last descendant who lived on the island, a guy called Noah Durant, passed away. Now, when Noah used to pay his £1 of salt, he would put on his best suit, and the governor would go over and meet him in his boat, pick him up, and he would come over and they'd have a big party. He would give his £1 of salt, and he would get a letter from the Queen that said that he had paid his rent for the year. And everybody would be happy. Noah would be taken back to his island, and that was it. But a little more about the Rhone. What happened after that is pretty much there's a burial ground on Salt Island where all the bodies that were recovered from the Rhone are buried. There's a small memorial ground there. It's basically a mass grave. But the main other things that happened to the Rhone was someone at some stage decided that the mast that saved some man's life was a bit of a shipping hazard. So what they actually done is that they blew this mast up. They put some dynamite around it and they blew it up. And what they actually done is they opened the stern section up like a clamshell. It's very, very open now. You can see lots and lots of the wreck. You can see the drive shaft. You can see the gearbox, and lots of small artifacts that are there. This isn't very similar to the bow section, which is pretty much intact. The ship's laying on a starboard side, and one of the most amazing things that you get to see is as you drop down onto the wreck, the bowsprit just comes up out of the sand. It's quite an incredible sight to see. There's an amazing amount of fish life around the wreck as well. They also filmed the deep with Jacqueline Bissett, Nick Nolte and Robert Shaw in it on this wreck. There's quite a few famous places. There's a hatch that all of the guys actually swam through for the movie. There's a small piece of rope that apparently Jacqueline Bissett put her arm into. There's also a ship's cannon, which was a small 2-pound cannon that was basically used for signalling, and that was just still there on the wreck. There's a condenser which has a lot of major fish life around it. It looks very much like a log cabin, but for fishing there, it's a great place to go. Other stuff that's on the Rhone, there are some wrenches down there. There's a big bilge pump that you can get to see. There's a thing that we actually think is a bathroom. There's some black and white marble tiles that have been down there since 1867 that basically has got no coral growing over them whatsoever. There's the propellers, probably 15 to 16 foot across, blade to blade, that you can see. It's just an incredible dive to see. Not a lot else has happened to the Rhone. They did make it a national park. I think it was in the late 50s, early 60s, just to stop people taking anything from the wreck. You're not actually allowed to take anything from the wreck, including shells or anything like that. We'd just love to see you come and dive the Rhone at some stage. It's an amazing dive.